Howdy, I'm happy. Living 50 years mostly in the wild, my best friends are the animals around me. Nature teaches us that even the most broken things can heal over time. Today, I'll share a heartwarming tale of Caleb, a carpenter who unexpectedly finds his lost love and 3 daughters, proving a broken compass can always find its true north. Where are you listening to this campfire tale from? Drop a comment below and please subscribe to the channel. Caleb, at 42, was the kind of man who anchored the world around him. He stood beside me, a towering figure with a muscular build forged by decades of shaping stubborn timber. His dark hair was generously flecked with silver, framing a face that was handsome but hardened by quiet grief. He was a stoic man, endlessly patient, masking a deeply broken heart beneath a gentle demeanor. In his left arm, he effortlessly balanced Toby, his 4-year-old adopted son. Toby was a chaotic hurricane of boundless energy, a little boy with a gap-toothed grin and wild, unruly blonde curls that seemed to defy gravity. Toby had been Caleb's salvation, pulling my best friend out of a suffocating depression years ago. Right now, Toby was aggressively trying to feed a half-eaten carrot to Buster, a local vendor's dog. Buster was a 10-year-old golden retriever mix, missing half of his left ear, a lazy, overweight creature with a coat the color of burnt toast who preferred snoring in the shade of the apple cart over acknowledging overly enthusiastic toddlers. The cart belonged to Old Man Henderson, a grumpy 70-something farmer whose skin resembled cured tobacco leather. He was a man of few words, known for his stubbornness and his unmatched organic goods. Caleb and I weren't just here for Henderson's crisp apples. We were hunting for his unbleached, pure beeswax and a specific natural hide glue. We were in the middle of a sacred project back at our shared workshop. We were restoring a shattered 1950 acoustic Gibson guitar. It wasn't just any instrument. It was the beloved relic of a late, legendary country musician brought to us in splinters. Caleb had poured his soul into it, treating the cracked mahogany like a fragile patient, desperately needing the perfect natural adhesives to heal its deep, historical wounds. The suffocating southern heat finally became too much, even for Caleb. Shifting Toby to his hip, Caleb used his free hand to unbutton the cuffs of his plaid flannel shirt, rolling the thick fabric high above his elbows. The action inadvertently exposed his right forearm, revealing a large, dark tattoo that contrasted sharply against his sun-baked skin. It was a striking piece of ink, an antique, heavily shaded compass, pierced violently by a jagged arrow, surrounded by 3 black roses that were tragically shedding their petals. It wasn't a piece of generic flash art picked from a parlor wall. Caleb had designed it himself, sketching the agonizing details on a napkin 9 years ago in Seattle. It was a permanent monument to a love that had burned him to the core. As Caleb leaned over to hand Henderson a crumpled $10 bill, 3 little girls suddenly detached themselves from the crowd and trotted right up to the apple stand. They were an impossible sight. A perfect identical trio. They looked to be about 8 years old, dressed in matching denim overall dresses that were impeccably clean. They possessed a wild mane of copper-brown hair and piercing ocean blue eyes that seemed far too observant for their age. The girl in the middle, who I later learned was Lily, stood with her hands on her hips. She was clearly the boldest of the 3, radiating a fearless, commanding energy. To her left was Emma, possessing a quiet, analytical gaze, absorbing every detail around her. On the right was Rose, slightly more timid, nervously twisting the hem of her denim skirt. Lily stopped dead in her tracks, her large blue eyes locking onto Caleb's exposed forearm. "Hello, sir." Lily's high, clear voice cut through the ambient noise of the market. "Our mother has a tattoo just like yours." Caleb paused, a polite, amused smile touching the corners of his mouth. He wiped his sweaty brow with the back of his hand, clearly thinking this was just a child mistaking his custom piece for a generic geometric shape. "Is that so, little lady?" Caleb replied, his deep voice rumbling kindly. "Maybe your mom just likes navigating with compasses." "No." Emma, the girl on the left, took a definitive step forward, shaking her head with absolute certainty. "Hers also has a broken arrow stabbing right through the compass, and exactly 3 black roses, with their petals falling off. She has it right on the back of her neck. She told us it's a secret from her youth." In that exact fraction of a second, Caleb died. I saw the blood violently drain from his face, leaving his rugged features an ashen gray. The polite smile froze, turning into a grimace of sheer, unadulterated shock. The bag of fresh organic apples slipped from his suddenly numb fingers, hitting the dusty grass with a dull, heavy thud. Toby squirmed in his arm, but Caleb was completely paralyzed. The oppressive Texas-like heat of the Tennessee afternoon vanished, replaced by an icy, suffocating dread. 9 years ago. Seattle. Maya. I knew the story. Maya had been a fiercely independent freelance painter, a woman who loved the wind more than the ground. She was a beautiful, chaotic free spirit who had shared Caleb's soul. They had gotten the matching tattoos as a vow of eternity. But one freezing winter morning, overwhelmed by the terrifying prospect of domestic life and commitment, she vanished. A brief note on the kitchen counter was all Caleb had left. It had destroyed him. What is your mother's name? Caleb's voice was barely a whisper, a dry, raspy sound that scraped violently against his throat. Our mom's name is Maya, the three girls chimed in unison, their innocent voices acting as the executioner's blade to Caleb's reality. I watched Caleb sway slightly. His mind was violently doing the math. 9 years since she left. 8-year-old triplets. The sheer, crushing gravity of the equation altered the entire trajectory of his universe in a single heartbeat. Lily, Emma, Rose, where did you run off to? The voice sliced through the muggy air. It was a voice that made Caleb flinch as if struck by lightning. From behind a row of vibrant tie-dye vendor tents, a woman burst into view, frantic and breathless. It was Maya. She looked different, yet painfully the same. Now in her late 30s, she had traded her paint-splattered jeans for a sophisticated, flowing white linen dress. Her copper hair was swept up in an elegant, messy bun. She was no longer just the starving artist. She carried the poised, successful aura of a gallery owner. But the panic in her eyes was raw. In her hands, she clutched a woven wicker basket. I noticed the contents small glass vials of deep beetroot extract and raw saffron threads. Natural, organic dyes. She was here for her art. I didn't know it then, but Maya had been desperately hunting for these specific pigments to finish a massive, chaotic oil painting of a midnight ocean storm. A piece she had started exactly 9 years ago and abandoned, unable to find the painting's missing soul. Maya rushed forward and then stopped as if she had hit an invisible brick wall. Their eyes collided. The country music, the chatter, the barking dogs, it all faded into an absolute, deafening silence. The wicker basket slipped from Maya's trembling hands. It hit the ground, spilling the vibrant red beetroot and golden saffron onto the green grass. A sudden, warm southern breeze swept through the aisle, lifting the stray ribbons of hair at the nape of her neck. There it was, clearly visible just above the collar of her dress. The compass, the broken arrow, the 3 falling black roses. Caleb stood frozen, his large, calloused hand gripping Toby's small one, his eyes locked onto the ghost of his past. The 3 miniature versions of the woman he had never stopped loving looked back and forth between them in utter confusion. The flight instinct kicked in for Maya. Her eyes widened with pure terror. She lunged forward, grabbing Lily and Emma by the hands, desperately trying to pull them away, to run just like she had 9 years ago. But Caleb moved faster. His large hand shot out, his fingers wrapping firmly, immovably around Maya's wrist. The touch sent a visible jolt through both of them. Caleb didn't yell. He didn't cause a scene, but his voice, low and trembling with 9 years of suppressed agony and the sudden, explosive realization of fatherhood, carried an absolute authority. We are talking, Caleb commanded, his eyes boring into hers. Today, a new, stormy chapter had just been ripped open right there in the Tennessee sun. Chapter 2. The truth hidden beneath the shell. The blistering heat of the farmer's market gave way to the cool, aggressive air conditioning of the Rusty Mug, a dimly lit, slightly run-down local cafe situated just a few blocks from the fairgrounds. The place smelled perpetually of stale coffee grounds and lemon floor cleaner. Behind the counter stood Brenda, the cafe's owner. She was a woman in her late 50s who looked as though she had survived at least 3 bad marriages and a minor hurricane. Tall and sharp-featured, Brenda sported a towering nest of stiff, bleached blonde hair and a faded pink apron. She had a notoriously gruff exterior, known for slapping laminated menus onto tables with completely unnecessary force, but everyone in town knew she had a heart of gold, always sneaking extra marshmallows into the local kids' hot cocos. Today, however, Brenda sensed the heavy, suffocating tension radiating from our group. and wisely decided to wipe down the espresso machine in absolute silence, leaving us to our corner. I sat alone at a small, wobbly table near the back, nursing a bitter mug of black coffee. My main job was to keep a watchful eye on the brightly colored, chaotic indoor play area just a few yards away. Toby, acting with the sudden, self-appointed authority of a protective older brother, was vigorously defending a plastic fortress in the ball pit alongside Lily, Emma, and Rose. Even amidst the shock, the girls seemed naturally drawn to Toby's infectious, boundless energy. A few tables away, secluded in a worn vinyl booth, sat Caleb and Maya. The physical distance between them was only a couple of feet across the scratched Formica table, but it might as well have been a vast, unbridgeable ocean. Maya looked entirely stripped of the sophisticated, successful gallery owner persona she had projected at the market. She stared down at her trembling hands, her fingers tightly wrapped around a mug of herbal tea she hadn't touched. When she finally spoke, her voice was fragile, breaking under the weight of a secret she had carried for almost a decade. She confessed that 9 years ago, the morning she packed her bags and fled that cramped Seattle apartment, she had been consumed by a suffocating fear. She was a young, chaotic artist, terrified of domesticity, terrified of becoming an anchor that would drag Caleb down. But the real tragedy struck just 3 weeks after she arrived in Nashville, looking for a fresh start. She found out she was pregnant, not just with 1 child, but with 3. "I was terrified, Caleb," Maya whispered, a single tear cutting a track through the light dusting of makeup on her cheek. "I had nothing. And I knew how much your freedom, your woodworking, meant to you. I convinced myself that bringing 3 babies into your life would destroy your future. By the time I realized how deeply I had messed up, my youthful pride and the overwhelming reality of being a single mother choked the life out of my courage. I couldn't face you. So I built a wall. I built a career here, alone, just to make sure they would never go hungry." From my vantage point, I watched Caleb's reaction. He was a statue of pure, agonizing conflict. His massive hands were clenched into tight fists, resting on the table, his knuckles bone white. The muscles in his jaw feathered violently. I knew my friend. I knew the profound, burning anger rising in his chest. He had been robbed, stripped of 8 years of first steps, midnight lullabies, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. He had spent years drowning in a dark depression, believing he wasn't enough for the woman he loved, only to find out she had been raising his flesh and blood in secret. Yet, as Caleb looked at Maya, really looked at her, the anger in his deep brown eyes began to fracture. He saw the faint, exhausted lines around her eyes, the subtle tremor in her shoulders, and the undeniable truth that she had carried the crushing weight of 3 lives entirely on her own back. She had sacrificed her own youth to protect them. Caleb slowly uncurled his fists. He reached across the table, his rough, calloused fingers stopping just short of touching hers. His voice, when it finally broke the heavy silence, was devoid of shouting, but it carried the immovable force of a mountain. "I am angry, Maya. More angry than I've ever been in my entire life," Caleb said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "But I am their father. You don't get to make that choice for me anymore. I will not let them live another single day of their lives without me." Maya closed her eyes, letting out a ragged, trembling breath as fresh tears spilled over her lashes. It was a silent surrender. The heavy, protective shell she had worn for 9 years had finally cracked. That evening, the heavy emotional toll of the day followed us back to the woodshop. The air inside our workspace was thick with the familiar, comforting scent of sharp pine, sour wood glue, and old dust. The solitary bulb, hanging above the central workbench, cast long, dramatic shadows against the exposed brick walls. Caleb didn't say a word. He walked straight to the center table, where the shattered remains of the 1,950 acoustic Gibson guitar lay in agonizing pieces. He picked up a block of medium grit sandpaper, his movements stiff and mechanical. For hours, the only sound in the shop was the harsh, rhythmic, and almost violent scraping of paper against aged mahogany. I sat quietly on a stool in the corner, polishing a set of brass tuning pegs, letting him work through the storm in his head. I watched as he aggressively sanded down the splinters, pouring every ounce of his mixed, chaotic emotions into the broken wood. But slowly, the violent motions transitioned into something softer. He began to trace the deep, jagged cracks running down the body of the guitar with his bare thumb. The fractures in the brittle wood mirrored the deep, raw lacerations in his own heart. Both were broken, both held a painful history, and both desperately needed to be carefully, patiently put back together. Miles away, in a sleek, high-rise apartment overlooking the glittering skyline of downtown Nashville, a different kind of silence reigned. Maya stood alone in the center of her expansive, immaculate living room. The girls were finally asleep, their breathing soft and rhythmic in the adjoining bedroom. Maya wore a paint-stained, oversized t-shirt, standing frozen before a massive, chaotic oil painting resting on a heavy wooden easel. It was the piece she had started 9 years ago. The canvas depicted a violent, midnight ocean storm swirling, aggressive strokes of deep indigo, black, and harsh, foamy whites. It was a beautiful, terrifying depiction of turmoil. But as she stared at it, the flaw was glaringly obvious. It lacked an anchor. There was no focal point, no light, no structure to give the storm meaning. It was just an endless, terrifying void. She reached down, her fingers brushing against the wicker basket of organic dyes she had recovered from the market, but she didn't pick up a brush. For 9 years, she had navigated a chaotic storm entirely on her own, fiercely protecting her daughters but leaving her own soul adrift. Looking at the dark canvas, Maya finally admitted to herself what she had been missing all along. Chapter 3. The Challenge of a 9-Year Gap. The following Saturday morning arrived with a crisp, golden brilliance, the kind of late summer Tennessee day where the humidity finally breaks, leaving the air smelling of dry grass and impending autumn. I was out on the porch of Caleb's farmhouse, nursing a mug of black coffee, when a sleek, spotless black SUV crunched its way up our long, uneven gravel driveway. It looked entirely alien against the backdrop of Caleb's rustic world, a sprawling, slightly weathered property framed by ancient, moss-draped oak trees and a faded red barn that leaned slightly to the left. Maya killed the engine. When the back doors opened, Lily, Emma, and Rose stepped out hesitantly. They were dressed for a magazine photo shoot rather than a working farm, wearing pristine white sneakers, neatly pressed pastel cardigans, and designer jeans without a single frayed thread. Maya emerged next, looking equally out of place in chic tailored trousers and sunglasses, her posture radiating a mixture of anxiety and fierce maternal protectiveness. The physical manifestation of the 9-year gap between her world and Caleb's was glaringly obvious. The silence that settled over the yard was heavy, thick with an awkward, paralyzing tension. The girls huddled close to their mother, staring wide-eyed at the rusted tractor in the distance. Then, the screen door flew open with a violent thwack. Toby burst onto the porch, wielding a half-eaten waffle like a tiny, sticky sword. He was wearing mismatched rubber boots, one yellow, one green, and a pair of denim overalls covered in mysterious mud stains. "You have a car like a spaceship," Toby yelled, his gap-toothed grin shattering the fragile silence. He didn't understand the complex, agonizing history standing in the driveway. To him, these were just 3 new playmates who had magically appeared at his house. Caleb walked out right behind him. He had traded his heavy work boots for comfortable worn loafers, a soft gray Henley clinging to his broad shoulders. He looked terrified, a rare expression for a man built like a lumberjack, but he managed a warm, gentle smile. "Welcome to the farm," Caleb said, his deep voice carrying a soothing, grounded cadence. He didn't rush them. He didn't force hugs. He simply invited them to see the apple orchard. The initial stiffness began to melt away beneath the canopy of the old apple trees. Caleb patiently hoisted each girl onto his broad shoulders so they could reach the highest, reddest, honey-crisp apples. Lily was fearless, commanding him to move left and right like a seasoned general. Emma was far more analytical, inspecting each apple for bruises before granting it entry into her woven basket. Rose, the quietest, simply rested her small hands on Caleb's head, giggling softly when he made ridiculous snoring noises every time she picked a fruit. I watched Maya from a distance. She was standing by the wooden fence, her sunglasses pushed up into her copper hair, her eyes wide as she watched her daughters, who usually demanded structured schedules and pristine environments, happily smudging dirt on their cheeks. To seal the deal, Caleb introduced them to Barnaby. Barnaby was a 15-year-old retired Shetland pony Caleb had rescued from a petting zoo a few years back. The pony looked like a rotund, overbaked potato with a coat of speckled oatmeal and an absurdly thick mane. Barnaby had a chronically grumpy expression and a habit of ignoring commands, but his stubborn demeanor instantly dissolved the moment anyone offered him a peppermint. Toby demonstrated the feeding technique, his small hand flat, allowing Barnaby's velvety lips to tickle his palm. Soon, even the timid Rose was feeding the pony, burying her face into his coarse mane while Caleb held her steady. Later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of violet and burnt orange, Caleb built a fire in the stone pit. He taught the girls the sacred, delicate art of roasting marshmallows until they were a perfect golden brown, while Toby inevitably set his on fire and ate the charred remains with alarming enthusiasm. Sitting on a wooden log, Maya quietly observed the chaotic, joyous scene. A profound realization washed over her features. Her daughters were laughing with a wild, unrestrained brightness she had never managed to cultivate in her immaculate, structured penthouse. As the evening air grew chilly, Caleb led the impromptu family away from the fire and into our sanctuary, the woodshop. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, revealing a space that smelled deeply of cedar, aged lacquer, and history. The shop was illuminated by a series of low-hanging, vintage incandescent bulbs that cast a rich, amber glow over the dust motes dancing in the air. Sitting proudly on the central workbench, under the spotlight of the warmest bulb, was the 1,950 Gibson acoustic guitar we had been working on. Caleb gathered the children around the heavy oak table. He explained to them, in a voice usually reserved for telling bedtime stories, that the guitar was like a wounded bird that needed to be carefully nursed back to health. He reached into his tool chest and cut out 3 tiny square pieces of fine grit sandpaper. Gently, he handed one to Lily, Emma, and Rose, and a slightly larger piece to Toby, whose primary job was to sand a scrap piece of pine so he wouldn't accidentally damage the antique instrument. "See these rough edges along the binding?" Caleb murmured, kneeling so he was at eye level with the girls. He guided Lily's small hand with his large, calloused one. "We just go slow, very soft, like petting Barnaby." The girls were mesmerized. The grand, expensive toys they had back in Nashville were instantly forgotten. They leaned in, their small faces bathed in the golden light of the workbench, completely absorbed in the careful, rhythmic motion of smoothing the broken wood. They were helping their father fix something shattered. Standing in the shadows near the doorway, Maya pulled a small, leather-bound moleskin notebook and a charcoal pencil from her designer tote bag. I watched her eyes dart between Caleb's gentle, patient hands and the glowing faces of her daughters. She began to sketch frantically, capturing the intimate, healing energy of the room. As she shaded the area around the hanging incandescent bulb, her hand suddenly stopped. She stared at the drawing, her breath hitching. For 9 years, she had been staring at a massive canvas of a dark, violent, and cold midnight ocean storm, unable to finish it because it was nothing but a void of despair. But looking at Caleb, a man who took broken, discarded things and patiently brought them back to life with his bare hands, she finally understood. Her painting didn't need more darkness. It needed a beacon. The rich, golden, amber light radiating from this dusty woodshop, illuminating the family she had kept hidden, was the exact color palette her soul and her canvas had been desperately missing. Chapter 4. The Fractures of Wood and Healing. Later that evening, after the chaotic energy of 4 children had finally burned out and the house descended into a profound, peaceful silence, Caleb and Maya found themselves alone on the sprawling wraparound porch. I had tactfully retreated to the living room with a book, leaving the window cracked just enough to hear the steady chorus of southern cicadas and the low murmur of their voices. The porch was bathed in the soft, golden glow of vintage string lights Caleb had hung years ago. At Maya's feet rested Duke, a stray Maine Coon mix who had adopted the farm 3 years prior. Duke was a massive, battle-scarred feline with a patch of gray fur missing from his left flank and one permanently clouded green eye. Despite his rugged, intimidating exterior, he was aggressively affectionate, his deep, rumbling purr acting as a grounding baseline to the heavy conversation about to unfold. Maya sat on the wooden swing, her knees pulled up to her chest, the defensive walls she had maintained for nearly a decade entirely stripped away. The darkness of the Tennessee night seemed to offer a safe blanket for the painful truths that needed to be spoken. With a voice that trembled like a fragile leaf, she wept. She wept for the years she had stolen, for the paralyzing cowardice of her youth, and for the sheer terror that had driven her to hide her pregnancy. She apologized for not trusting Caleb's strength, for assuming his love wasn't vast enough to encompass a family he hadn't planned for. Caleb sat in the heavy oak rocking chair opposite her, listening in silence as the woman he loved unburdened her soul. When her tears finally slowed, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, with a raw, brutal honesty, Caleb admitted that for years he had hated her. He confessed to the dark, suffocating nights where anger was the only thing keeping him from drowning in grief. But then, he looked out toward the darkened apple orchard, his voice softening into a gentle, reverent whisper. He told her that seeing Lily, Emma, and Rose, seeing the perfect, beautiful lives she had fiercely protected and nurtured, had extinguished that hatred completely. The anger had burned away, leaving behind only a profound, overwhelming gratitude for the three angels she had brought into the world. Slowly, Caleb reached across the space between them. His large, rough hand gently covered Maya's trembling fingers. It was a hesitant, breathless touch, but it carried the undeniable weight of true forgiveness. In that quiet moment, under the amber lights, the embers of their past romance reignited, no longer fueled by the reckless, chaotic passion of their youth, but burning with a mature, steady, and unbreakable warmth. The tranquility of the night, however, was shattered the following morning by a sudden, terrifying crash originating from the woodshop. I bolted up from the kitchen table, nearly spilling my coffee, and sprinted toward the barn with Caleb right on my heels. When we pushed the heavy wooden doors open, a scene of absolute devastation awaited us. Lily, Emma, and Rose were frozen in terror near the central workbench, tears already streaming down their pale faces. Toby stood nearby, his hands covering his mouth in shock. On the sawdust-covered floor lay the antique 1950 Gibson acoustic guitar. The girls, eager to surprise Caleb by helping him sand before he woke up, had accidentally knocked the heavy instrument off its padded stand. While the body hadn't shattered, a massive, deep, and ugly scratch now violently scarred the pristine, newly polished mahogany face. The triplets burst into hysterical sobs, their small bodies shaking as they braced for the inevitable explosion of anger they assumed was coming. They were used to a world where broken, expensive things resulted in harsh scoldings. But Caleb didn't yell. He didn't even flinch. He let out a slow, calming breath, walked over to the girls, and dropped to his knees so he was directly at their eye level. He pulled all three of them into a massive, reassuring hug, his deep voice rumbling with gentle comfort, promising them that it was just a piece of wood and that they were far more important. Once their tears were wiped away, Caleb gently lifted the scarred guitar and placed it back on the bench. He walked over to his locked cabinet and retrieved a small jar of natural hide glue and a tiny glass vial filled with a shimmering, brilliant gold mica powder. Maya, who had just rushed into the shop hearing the commotion, stood silently by the doorway, her breath caught in her throat. Caleb gathered the children around the bench. Carefully, he mixed the gold powder into the thick adhesive, creating a paste that looked like liquid sunlight. Using a fine brush, he didn't try to hide the massive scratch. Instead, he painted the golden glue directly into the jagged wound, deliberately highlighting the damage rather than concealing it. It was the ancient Japanese art of kintsugi. As he worked, Caleb looked up at his daughters, his eyes reflecting the warm amber light of the shop. "You see," he explained, his voice echoing softly in the quiet barn. "Sometimes things get dropped. Sometimes they get deeply broken. But if you know how to heal them with patience and love, those broken places become part of their history. And when they heal, they become even more beautiful and far more valuable than they were before they fell." The profound weight of those words hit Maya like a physical force. She stared at the golden scar on the guitar, a brilliant, shining testament to survival and repair. The phrase echoed relentlessly in her mind for the rest of the day. That afternoon, as soon as she returned to her sleek downtown Nashville apartment, she walked straight into her studio. She didn't bother changing out of her clothes. She stood before the massive, dark, and violent oil painting of the midnight ocean storm that had haunted her for 9 years. Grabbing her palette, she furiously mixed vibrant cadmium yellow, burnt sienna, and bright titanium white. With bold, passionate strokes, she painted a towering, radiant lighthouse directly in the center of the chaotic sea. She used the warm, amber tones she had witnessed in Caleb's woodshop, allowing the brilliant light to aggressively pierce through the dark clouds and the raging waves. The golden beams banished the gloomy, isolating darkness of the canvas, transforming the painting from a depiction of hopeless despair into a magnificent, breathtaking masterpiece of hope, guidance, and ultimate salvation. Chapter 5. The symphony of connection. The transition from the stifling, oppressive heat of August to the crisp, vibrant embrace of a Tennessee autumn was gradual, but the monumental shift within our makeshift family felt as natural and inevitable as the changing leaves. Over the course of a few short months, the invisible boundaries that once separated Caleb's rustic, sawdust-covered farm and Maya's sophisticated, fast-paced downtown life completely dissolved. The children, naturally, led the charge in bridging the gap. Lily, Emma, and Rose, who had once been terrified of getting a single speck of mud on their pristine designer sneakers, had fully embraced the wild, unstructured freedom of the country. They absolutely adored their little adopted brother Toby. It wasn't uncommon to find the four of them orchestrating elaborate, chaotic pirate adventures in the hayloft, with Toby acting as the fearless captain and the girls serving as his fiercely loyal, highly organized crew. Caleb and Maya, meanwhile, had quietly and organically slipped into a profound, romantic rhythm. Their renewed relationship wasn't characterized by the explosive, reckless, and ultimately destructive passion that had burned them 9 years ago. Instead, it was a mature, steady, and deeply peaceful love, built on a foundation of mutual sacrifice and profound understanding. Caleb stepped into Maya's glamorous art world not as a glittering artificial accessory, but as her immovable rock. I remember watching him at one of her high-profile gallery exhibitions in the heart of the city. He wore a simple, well-tailored dark suit that still couldn't hide the broad, callous shoulders of a lifelong carpenter. He stood quietly by her side, a calm, towering anchor amidst a chaotic sea of frantic socialites and harsh critics. It was at this particular exhibition that I first encountered Eleanor Vance, the senior curator of Nashville's most prestigious modern art museum. Eleanor was a formidable, intimidating woman in her early 60s, sporting a razor-sharp silver bob and an impeccably tailored monochromatic pantsuit. She was notoriously hard to please, possessing a ruthless, cutting intellect forged by decades of surviving and conquering a highly competitive, male-dominated art industry. However, beneath her icy, uncompromising exterior, she harbored a fierce, protective, maternal instinct over Maya's career and well-being. As Eleanor watched Caleb gently place a reassuring, calloused hand on the small of Maya's back to steady her nerves during a difficult interview, the strict curator offered a rare, genuine smile of approval, recognizing that her star artist had finally found the grounding force she had lacked for nearly a decade. Conversely, Maya found her true, unshakable sanctuary back at the farm. She happily traded her expensive silk blouses for Caleb's oversized flannel shirts, spending her chilly mornings sipping coffee on the wooden porch, with Duke, the battle-scarred, one-eyed Maine Coon, purring heavily in her lap. It was during one of these quiet, frost-kissed mornings, while standing shoulder to shoulder watching the four kids chase Barnaby the pony across the golden pasture, that Caleb and Maya made the momentous, beautiful decision to officially move in together, permanently blending their two separate realities into one warm, chaotic home. While their family solidified into an unbreakable unit, the two great artistic endeavors of their lives also reached their magnificent conclusions within the cedar-scented walls of the woodshop. Caleb finally completed the painstaking, meticulous restoration of the shattered 1,950 acoustic Gibson guitar. It was a breathtaking sight to behold. The antique mahogany body now possessed a deep, glossy luster that warmly reflected the ambient amber light of the shop. The massive, ugly scratch that had terrified the triplets months ago was now a striking, intricate river of shimmering gold. Through the ancient kintsugi technique, Caleb had transformed the violent blemish into the instrument's most beautiful and defining feature, proving that scars could be a source of immense pride. When Caleb finally strung the guitar and struck the very first chord, the sound that echoed through the quiet barn was incredibly rich, resonant, and impossibly soulful, as if the aged, battered wood was finally singing its profound gratitude for being saved and put back together. On the exact opposite side of the shop, bathed in the soft, natural light pouring through a large bay window, Maya put the final, delicate brushstroke on her 9-year masterpiece. The massive oil painting had evolved dramatically from its dark, chaotic origins. The violent, terrifying midnight ocean storm was still present in the background, but its destructive power was now brilliantly overpowered by the towering, radiant lighthouse she had painted after witnessing Caleb's endless grace with the broken guitar. The lighthouse cast a powerful, warm golden beam across the churning, black waves, safely guiding a small, fragile wooden boat toward the calm shore. But the most breathtaking and emotionally devastating detail lay hidden in plain sight, requiring a close, intimate look at the canvas to discover. Painted with painstaking precision onto the glowing glass window of the lighthouse was the faint, delicate silhouette of an antique compass. Surrounding the compass were 3 black roses, but unlike the tragic, dying petals permanently inked on their necks and arms, these painted roses were in full, magnificent bloom. The artwork was a spectacular, triumphant declaration that their long, painful winter of separation was over, and a beautiful season of growth had officially begun. When Eleanor Vance drove her luxury sedan out to the dusty farm a few weeks later to inspect Maya's finished piece for the highly anticipated Nashville Autumn Charity Auction, the biggest, most exclusive philanthropic gala of the year, she was rendered entirely speechless. Eleanor stood frozen before the canvas for a long time, her usually critical, sharp eyes softening with unshed tears. Then, her gaze drifted across the sawdust-covered room and landed on the glowing, gold-scarred Gibson guitar resting proudly on Caleb's workbench. After hearing the emotional story of its restoration and the family's journey, the formidable curator made an executive, uncompromising decision on the spot. Both the painting and the guitar were extraordinary testaments to the sheer power of healing, and both absolutely had to be featured side by side as the undisputed crown jewels of the upcoming charity auction. Chapter 6. A Joyous Country Symphony. The Nashville Autumn Charity Gala was an event that usually felt light years away from the sawdust, sweat, and calloused hands of our rustic farm life. Held on the expansive, meticulously manicured grounds of a historic botanical garden, the outdoor venue had been magically transformed into a breathtaking ballroom beneath the vast, star-strewn Tennessee sky. Thousands of warm fairy lights were draped through the branches of ancient weeping willows, casting a soft, romantic glow over the crowd of philanthropists, socialites, and artists. The cool, crisp autumn air carried the elegant scent of roasted chestnuts, blooming night jasmine, and expensive champagne. I stood near the edge of the grand lawn, tugging slightly at the collar of my unfamiliar rented tuxedo, feeling entirely out of my element, but incredibly proud of the family I was there to support. When Caleb and Maya arrived, the entire atmosphere seemed to shift, drawing the admiring eyes of the high society crowd. They looked absolutely radiant, moving together with a natural, undeniable grace. The family had coordinated their attire in a stunning tone-sur-tone palette of deep midnight blue and subtle gold, perfectly reflecting the starry night above them. Lily, Emma, and Rose wore matching midnight blue velvet dresses, their copper curls tied back with shimmering gold ribbons, making them look like a trio of woodland princesses. Toby, practically vibrating with excitement, marched ahead of them in a tiny navy vest and a gold bow tie, his unruly blonde hair slicked back for the very first time. Maya was a vision in a flowing, silk evening gown that elegantly draped her figure, while Caleb stood tall and ruggedly handsome in a sharp charcoal suit with a midnight blue tie. He still looked like a man who could fell a tree with a single swing of an axe, but tonight, his eyes held a profound, peaceful joy that outshined the elaborate crystal chandeliers. As the evening progressed, the formidable curator Eleanor Vance took the stage to announce the highly anticipated centerpiece of the auction. The crowd hushed as the velvet curtains parted. Standing center stage was Silas Montgomery, a legendary country music artist who had been specifically invited to present the musical portion of the auction. Silas was a man in his late 50s with a silver-stubbled jaw, a face deeply lined by decades of endless highway tours, and a signature black Stetson hat pulled low over his eyes. Known for his warm, gravelly voice and a rebellious spirit that had charmed the entire nation, Silas held a deep reverence for musical history. In his weathered hands, he cradled the 1,950 acoustic Gibson guitar that Caleb had painstakingly restored. "Ladies and gentlemen," Silas spoke into the microphone, his deep, resonant voice echoing across the silent lawn. "I've played thousands of guitars in my life, but I've never held one that tells a story of survival quite like this." Silas adjusted his grip and struck the first chord. The sound that erupted from the kintsugi scarred mahogany was nothing short of magical. It was incredibly clear, resonant, and overflowing with a rich, sorrowful, but triumphant soul. As Silas began to play a beautiful, acoustic country love song, the golden rivers of glue on the guitar's body caught the stage lights, shimmering brilliantly with every strum. The music wove through the crisp autumn air, wrapping around the audience in a warm, emotional embrace. Simultaneously, directly behind Silas, a massive digital screen illuminated to reveal Maya's completed masterpiece. The painting of the towering, radiant lighthouse piercing through the violent midnight storm, guiding the small wooden boat to safety, left the crowd utterly breathless. The subtle detail of the compass and the blooming black roses in the lighthouse window shone like a beacon of hope. The synergy of the two artworks, the father's patient, golden healing of the wood, and the mother's brilliant, vibrant triumph over darkness, blended into a perfect, poetic harmony. The bidding war that followed was fierce and unprecedented. Paddles flew into the air in a rapid, chaotic frenzy until Eleanor Vance finally dropped her wooden gavel, officially selling Maya's painting for a record-breaking, astronomical price that shattered the charity's historical ceiling. The crowd erupted into a deafening standing ovation. Amidst the roaring applause, Caleb gently handed Toby over to me and slowly made his way toward the stage. Silas, recognizing the man who had resurrected the historic guitar, stepped back with a respectful nod and handed Caleb the microphone. The music faded, and a curious, expectant hush fell over the elegant crowd once again. Caleb looked out into the sea of faces, his gaze bypassing the wealthy philanthropists and locking directly onto Maya, who was standing near the front row, holding the hands of their 3 daughters. 9 years ago, Caleb began, his deep voice steady but carrying a raw, emotional vulnerability that captivated everyone in attendance. I made a mark on my arm, a broken compass. I thought it meant I was destined to be lost, drifting through a life that didn't have a true direction. I spent years in the dark, believing that the best parts of my story were already over. He paused, taking a slow step down from the stage to stand directly in front of Maya. The crowd instinctively parted, giving them space. Caleb reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a small, meticulously hand-carved cherrywood box. He didn't drop his gaze from Maya's tear-filled eyes as he slowly sank down onto one knee right there on the manicured grass. Lily, Emma, Rose, and Toby gasped in unison, their hands flying to their mouths. "But you," Caleb whispered, though the microphone carried his words to the very back of the garden. "You gave me the light. You gave me our beautiful girls. You gave me a home, and you gave me back my soul. My compass isn't broken anymore, Maya, because it finally found its true north." He opened the wooden box, revealing a stunning, understated diamond ring resting on a bed of dark velvet. "Will you marry me?" Maya didn't even try to hold back her tears. They cascaded down her cheeks, a mixture of profound relief, overwhelming love, and absolute joy. She didn't bother with words. She simply threw her arms around Caleb's neck, nodding vigorously as she buried her face in his shoulder. "Yes," she sobbed happily into his suit. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The crowd exploded into wild cheers, but the loudest, most joyous noise came from their 4 children. Toby, Lily, Emma, and Rose rushed forward, tackling their parents into a massive, chaotic, and beautiful group hug. I watched my best friend, surrounded by the family he had fought so hard to reclaim, laughing from the very bottom of his chest. The golden scars of the guitar, the radiant light of the painting, and the unbreakable bond of their family had all converged into this single, perfect moment. They were 6 souls, holding tightly onto each other, laughing and crying with unbridled happiness under the endless, starry sky of Tennessee. The lesson of this story is that nothing is ever too broken to be healed. Just like the shattered guitar and the dark painting, our own lives can sometimes feel damaged or lost. In our daily routines, we face regrets, mistakes, and heartbreaks. We might feel like a broken compass without a direction, but if we embrace forgiveness and let love do its work, those broken pieces can be put back together. Our scars become golden marks of strength and beauty. Every single one of us has the chance to find our true north and build a warm home filled with light. Please share this story with someone who might need a little hope today. Leave a comment to share your feelings and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to bring you more touching stories. May God bless you and your loved ones with a peaceful heart, endless grace, and the strength to heal any broken bonds in your life. If you believe that love can mend all wounds and guide us home, please comment Amen below.